Good evening, everyone. My name is Hossam Zaytoun. I'm a professor of strategy and behavioral science here. I had the pleasure to teach our wonderful full-time MBA students last term. I'm also course director of the executive MBA at Warwick. And today it's my great pleasure to interview Mr. Dalraj Nijar about his journey from Warwick to becoming an entrepreneur, and honored to be among the 30 under 30 of Forbes magazine, a very prestigious award that is for the European region. So really amazing insights that you can learn. What we're going to do is we'll start with an introduction of his journey, and I'll ask him some questions that were given to me by the board of this club. And after 25 minutes or so, we'll open it up to you to ask some further questions. So, Daraj, please tell us about your journey from Warwick to becoming such a successful entrepreneur.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. A few years ago, around 2019, I was working at WMG across the road from here, where I was lucky enough to be one of the founding members of an accelerator program. So within that program, I was very fortunate to be working with founders who just had an idea on paper to some really established businesses. And taking some of the tools and frameworks that we'd learned from colleagues, particularly Professor Jay Bell, who's in the crowd today, actually, worth speaking to if you're here, helping these businesses and these founders think better about what they're doing, tell them things they didn't think they knew as well, and open up opportunities and capabilities outside of, their typical framework and what they're thinking about and what they're trying to solve. So to give you an example, we work with companies that are working on electric vehicle motors. We were working with companies that were, trying to modernize supply chains, very different topics altogether, but really trying to help them in depth in a collaborative approach to, de-risk what they're doing, really refine how they can solve meaningful problems and organize themselves in a way in which they can give themselves the best chance possible to be successful, right? Because a lot of startups unfortunately fail, right? I think the statistic is probably still over 90%. But through that failure comes immense learning. And how you take that learning forward is really important, right? You can use that to then generate better ideas. Ideas are a million, but it's actually about your execution of how you go about it is more important. And through that failure, through that learning, you can refine that. So overall, had a great experience here and worked with some really great people. And then towards the end of my time here, there are various options, whether to carry on with the team or start something on my own. I've always had that entrepreneurial bug, coming from a business a family business based in hospitality and catering, working with my brother who's here today as well, side by side for many years. I was fortunate enough, given the ecosystem that Warwick possesses, you bump into people, you can make connections very easily. I met my co-founders in the civil engineering department, again, just over the road from WMG. And they were trying to solve a problem in concrete, believe it or not. And I knew nothing about concrete. I knew nothing about it. But I already heard of the industry as you do. You see big grey buildings, you think, oh, they're concrete, great. What's so amazing about that? And so he was trying to solve the emissions problem associated with concrete production, and specifically taking the carbon dioxide that's typically emitted from making cement, which is the glue in concrete, very simply speaking, and reintroduce that into concrete to make it cheaper, cleaner, stronger at scale. So really quite compelling pitch overall and quite a meaningful problem, which excited me. So we then came together towards the end of 21, start of 2022 to start that and bring that forward. So actually the idea, I guess, or the company was pretty much incubated here unofficially under the radar, if you will. And now today it's a team of 18 people. We've raised £7 million in funding through VCs and government grants. And now we're scaling up our technology and trying to hopefully make revenue in the next 18 months and go global from there onwards. And it's been a very hard journey, long hours, lots of mistakes, lots of learning, and it's not easy, but it's not meant to be easy. And I think I'm happy to share what I've learned and how I've gone about it, and hopefully that could be useful to the guys here and the girls here today.
Yep, excellent. So what gave you the drive to become an entrepreneur?
I think it's natural. I think it comes from a little bit of, family background. I was exposed to it very early. I think that helps. I think some people are more inclined or have, let's say, the natural muscle for it, whereas others maybe don't have so much. I think it can be worked on. And so that kind of internal drive, ambition has always been inset within me to do something. And from that, I've always just tried to, push myself to do new things, try to explore new ideas and new avenues. So yeah, I think it's important. It's a key fundamental aspect I've observed of other entrepreneurs as well. They have this drive, this need to continue to better themselves, but also there's a little bit of a superiority complex in a maybe not so healthy way, but also a little bit of an inferiority complex. I think they're not good enough either, and so they keep pushing. So not to say that I'm crazy like that, maybe a little bit in a control way, but yeah, I think drive is very important, because particularly when things are hard, when things are going not well, which is usually a lot of the time, it's important to have persistence and drive, and at the same time, pair that with clear thinking, because sometimes it's not worth carrying on with a business idea or carrying on with how you're operating. You have to make very hard decisions. And in the heat of the moment, in very pressurized environments where there's expectation, there's stakeholders who are telling you should do it this way, that way, you have to be very clear in your conviction. So having that drive is very important to carry you through.
You mentioned earlier that most entrepreneurs fail, which is true. Statistics show that. And it reminds me of one of my academic papers where we look at the bright and dark sides of overconfidence. So often overconfidence is viewed as something bad because you overestimate your skills and abilities. But actually it turns out that for entrepreneurs, it can be a good thing, because if they weren't overconfident, very often they wouldn't get started in the first place. How does that resonate with your experience?
No, I could definitely see that. I think for myself, I wouldn't say I was overconfident, but I had the appetite for risk. I think I don't think confidence was natural to me, but I think more broadly how I'd call it is your appetite for risk will then dictate how entrepreneurial you can or can't be. But for sure, I can definitely resonate with that. I think there is almost like fake it till you make it attitude in the beginning, because you don't necessarily, most entrepreneurs who don't have the track record when they start, they're just building it out. But I think if you can quickly show that you can execute really well, and you can get traction under your belt, and you can prove, through your minimal viable products or, any other means to prove that, let's say, there's semblance or there's credence to what you're doing, I think then that creates a snowball effect, right? And then means that people then believe, yes, there's something happening, and momentum can build. But at the same time, as you probably, you're hinting at in your question, you don't want overconfidence to become arrogance. So you don't want to misuse it. And I think that's where maybe additional experience comes through. As years go by, you continue to execute, more challenges come up, and how you navigate them isn't going to be solved through confidence. It's got to be solved through clear thinking, clear strategy, and good organization and good skills of people around you in a team to help you do that. But yeah, you need confidence, you need risk appetite, and you need to go for things, right? Otherwise they won't happen.
What did being in the Forbes 30 under 30 mean to you personally and professionally?
I mean, it's nice recognition, for sure. It's always nice to be recognized. But I think more importantly is probably due to the fact that I've done some good things, right? So that just shows to me, or how I took it was, I need to continue doing good things, continue to execute really well, and continue with my actions to prove that, whether it's this company or any other company I may be working for in the future or working with, that you deliver, right? So yeah, always nice to get recognized, always nice to be, always nice to have that. But I try not to let it get to my head. I think it's important to have a level of humbleness to it, because I'm more interested in building interesting things and impacting on a more wide level than my own personal, I guess, accolades. But it's always nice, of course.
Did it open any doors for you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 100%. Of course, you get exposed to different networks, obviously fellow listers. To be honest, I haven't really exploited it as best as I could have, because I've just been too busy, trying to work on the company, as it tends to be, can be very all-consuming. But sure, it gets nice recognition. You get obviously lots of inbound and people trying to get your attention in a good way. So yeah, it has offered up a lot of opportunity and a lot of nice connections, which has been helpful. And in parallel, it kind of helps to provide some extra credibility to the company I'm building as well, which is nice. What I'm more interested in.
You mentioned that you needed to have a clear strategy. And one problem with your strategy as an entrepreneur is you have a lot of uncertainty, because very often the market does not exist, is not clearly defined, like what is the market where you're creating a new product or service. plus you don't have a lot of resources in terms of financial resources, human resources, intellectual property. How do you deal with those constraints to become successful?
It depends on how you view it, right? Constraints can actually be opportunities, because on the other hand, there are plenty of examples of companies where they've had lots of money, lots of resources, lots of time, and they haven't been able to execute, and they still failed, right? So it's not so much about that. It's a confluence of timing, of market, of team, of how you're going about it as well. So I think, but just to take your context in the, let's say, the constrained version, you have to be very focused on what you're trying to do and trying to prove out whether there is something to this, right? And give yourself windows of time that are not too long in order to prove that something works or not, because time is the most valuable resource out of anything, regardless of money or anything else. So there's no point on working on something for 3 years and it doesn't work, right? So you have to give yourself milestones to hit in order to say, let's say within 2 months. I always say to people that, within 2 months, I want to prove X. Otherwise, there's no point in going from that point onwards to the next, because I haven't proven that this thing can work to any credibility. So I think that then comes back to the kind of concepts that some of you may have heard about around building an MVP, gaining some traction, getting some initial feedback from whatever business idea you may have. That is crucial, right? In the very early days, it's crucial to get that feedback, and that loop is very important. That iterative loop is very important from there. So yeah, that would be my thinking on that.
That's a fascinating point about this loop, because there's one commonality between entrepreneurs and professors is you have very long feedback lags. For example, when we try to publish papers, it takes years and years to publish a single paper. For entrepreneurs, often you have this long feedback lag as well. How do you deal with that, especially if you say you want to have iterative loops?
It depends. I think it depends on what you're building. In some ways, you can have long feedback loops, but if anything, you're trying to make that shorter, because you're trying to then validate, are you still on the right path? Do you need to actually pivot slightly? Do you need to go to a different way? And keep your eyes open. Still focus on the way in front, and you're trying to solve problem X. But actually, things can evolve. Other solutions can come up and change your window of opportunity. There may be other macroeconomic factors or factors outside of your control, which mean that the timing of what you're trying to attempt is not right. So those are things you can't control. But what you can control is how you execute upon whatever you're trying to do, how you go about that, and trying to do that as effectively as possible. And that, I'd say, that would be a key advice I'd give to the people here that are, let's say, entrepreneurial in nature. It's not about your idea; it's about how you do it, honestly, and who you do it with as well. The density of talent is really important. I was talking to you earlier. Trying to build my company, hiring is very hard, and retaining great talent is very hard. And if you want to build very large businesses, whether it be in very established industries or frontier industries such as AI, for example, it's all about talent. 80% of the problem is talent. And I've had very sleepless nights about that, and I still do. So, if you can then organize those people in the right way, and position them in the places they need to be in order to then deliver to the core problem you're trying to solve or the mission you're trying to go on, that's, a lot of the way you're setting yourself up for success, not necessarily guaranteeing it, but you're giving yourself the best chance possible. And that becomes then the challenge, on day 2, day 3, as opposed to day 1 or day 0, where it's just proving whether your thing works, right? Which can be done on relatively modest resources, but then going to the scaling steps is a whole different challenge, right? But that's the fun of entrepreneurship and trying to build very interesting companies as well.
And concretely, how do you attract and retain the talent?
It's a great question. It's, I think, depending on the candidates, it's trying to sell them a vision, trying to sell them ownership in what you're trying to deliver. To say that, look, we believe that you're a very strong person, and we believe that you can own this particular piece of work or project or part of the company and run with it, but make it your own, right? And that in itself requires people of a bit of an entrepreneurial streak as well, let's say, particularly in the early employees. And then it becomes a bit more specialist over time as the company grows, and it kind of settles down into a particular mode of operating. And so, we try to incentivize, particularly in the early stage where maybe they might get a slightly better salary somewhere else. You'd go towards, through equity options, for example, and making them basically a center of excellence in the company to say, look, you're a domain expert in X. and we want you to be that person, your go-to person for that particular area. And that gives people, more for satisfaction as opposed to just getting a nice salary and they don't do anything, right? People want to feel that their work is valued, it's meaningful, and it has a direct line to the impact of the company. And I think in a startup, there's no better place for that.
Do you also give them more freedom than they would have in a bigger company?
No.
No. You want to elaborate?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sure. Sorry. No, not necessarily. I can see where you're trying to go with that. But if anything, the freedom could be misconstrued into doing unnecessary things, right? So then it requires you to, or as a leadership team, to rein that in, right, and keep the focus. So it's not necessarily about freedom. Maybe freedom in the early days when you're exploring and tinkering around with different propositions of what you're trying to do, but particularly when you're established in, let's say, the company you're trying to build and the problem you're trying to solve, I would argue actually freedom is probably not the way to think about it, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. The reason I brought up this question, we know from the pharmaceuticals industry, you often have companies like Pfizer, huge companies that acquire small startups because those startups are more innovative. But the problem is once they acquire those startups and impose their hierarchy, a lot of those people leave because they lose autonomy, they lose freedom. That's where it comes from. But as you say, sometimes you need to take a different approach.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And it's a very common story when that happens, because the culture that built that particular startup was unique to that and actually helped drive that to that particular moment, right? And in big corporates, typically that culture is not there, right? It's very much diluted. It can be there in some pockets, not to say it can't be altogether, but it becomes very stable. It becomes like an oil tanker. You can't move it, right? It moves very slowly, whereas startups are much more agile and can move much faster. As soon as it goes into that context, it loses that power, unfortunately. But there we go.
And what are the concrete lessons from university that helped you build a startup?
I guess in my case, it was slightly different. I didn't necessarily do a course here. I was lucky enough to be exposed to a very, 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 very good course and help, I guess, deliver it. And I think in that way, what it showed to me is how you can take certain frameworks and apply it in the right context, right? So, from my journey in academia and then working at Warwick here and at WMG, I think there's only a few things that really, let's say, I took home. You can't absorb all that information. Well, I can't absorb all that information, but there's key things that you take and you learn, you absorb, and then how can you then apply those when the time is right? I think that's how I've thought about it. So, thinking about certain, for example, business model questions of how we should set up our company and how we should potentially adapt them over time relative to what we're trying to achieve and how, things are going. That's some of the, let's say, learning I've taken from before in terms of the more base theory, and then think about, okay, how can I really apply this particular situation and how can I apply it effectively? I think that's important. And continuing to do that post education, post academia is very important. So yeah, that's what I would say.
And how did you know that the timing was right?
Well, that's a good point. You don't sometimes, right? It's a little bit a leap of faith. But oftentimes things will go wrong first, and then you have to fix them. You have to fix them effectively. So usually that's a sign. And if
you have an example,
oh God, yeah. I would say even now, right? So in the company right now, we've had to pivot multiple times because the technology that we're developing had changed in form. So we'd started out in just trying to decarbonize concrete and provide a cost-effective solution to do that. But now it's actually morphed into making materials from carbon dioxide, best-in-class materials that replace incumbents. And so that requires then a change in strategy. So, for example, one of our key products is actually a fertilizer. Now, we didn't set out to make a fertilizer, but that's just how it's kind of came to be. And so that has required a strategic pivot in our attention span, because a lot of the value that is ascribed in our commercial model is associated with that. So therefore, you need to increase your knowledge base, you need to increase your resources, you need to increase your capability in that area, right? And that's been very quick shift, a very quick pivot to do that. So And that's going to happen again in the future. It may not necessarily in that particular area, but in something else. So we have to be ready and prepared and agile enough in order to accommodate for that. And that's, again, a good lesson for any other company or company builder.
Mm. And some of the obvious questions when you start a new business is, first, why hasn't anybody done this before? And second, why am I the right person to do it?
Yeah.
How did you answer those for yourself?
Great questions. Yeah. I think in my case, it's probably a little bit of naivety, thinking I could do it. So like I said, overconfidence was probably came to be there. Because, you know, if you don't do it, you won't know. So there's I think there's a semblance there. But there is definitely something about founder market fit, right? There has to be a match between who you are uniquely as a person, your skill set, and what you're designed or capable of doing versus with the opportunity you're trying to go after, right? So naturally, maybe to give a lazy example, if you don't know nothing about AI, you probably shouldn't do anything about AI until you become more of an expert in AI, for example, right? Given that it's all the rage. Like, I wouldn't do it because I'm not an expert. But at the same time, there are people that will probably go for it. They have the overconfidence and they may get somewhere, they may get nowhere, right? So then the timing aspect comes into play again. If you can time your entry into these areas when it's on a rise, and you can be one of those early movers, you know, that's also out of your control. So I think if in my case, where I wasn't necessarily a domain expert in this particularly technical field, the other people around me were, right? So I brought drive, I brought, execution capability, I brought a commercial nous and an ability to present and to create partnerships, and to really settle things, early processes, and drive them. And I think that, again, it comes back to my point on team. If you can build a good early team of people that are complementary in skill set, complementary in capability, then you have the best chance possible of doing what you want to do.
And why do you think this opportunity was unexploited by other people when you entered the market?
In our particular case, it wasn't fully unexploited. It's just that it wasn't done to the quality or to the way that we would think about doing it, right? So in our particular area, I think there's over 60, 70 companies, broadly speaking, trying to tackle this problem in different ways, right? But none of them had really achieved a scale. They'd not really scaled across, geographies like Europe or North America or at all, for different reasons. Usually cost of the technology is too high, switching costs are too high, and various other problems of that type, right? So we were thinking, how can we negate that with a very simple to adopt, easy to implement solution that can deliver better results, faster, cheaper, etc., right? And solve the problem better. And therefore we had a better chance in theory to do it, and now we have to execute on that. So I think that speaks to other industries where there are already solutions, as you quite rightly pointed out. Usually someone's already tried to do what you've done, or some version of it, or they've got another solution which tries to tackle that problem in a different way. I was just speaking to a student earlier about that. So therefore, whatever you're doing has to be, hopefully, at least in theory at the beginning, so much better. It has to be so much inherently better to even give yourself a chance. And then you have all the uncertainty of then actually going about doing it, which then requires that confidence, that execution capability, all the things I've already talked about. So if you can do that correct, you give yourself the best chance for sure. And I think in our case we did. But even in our case, even though in theory, when we went out to market and we talked about our idea as it is, and it resonated very well with the people that we were going to solve it for, we've gone and pivoted anyway, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go in that straight line and it's going to happen all and everything's going to be fine. Things will naturally change. You have to adapt, and you have to go with the wind sometimes. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
One more question before we open up to the audience.
Sure.
We know that businesses need different types of leaders at different stages. For example, some leaders are very good at turning around the business, but then they don't want to let go, and they become less good at leading the business during stable times. Similar for entrepreneurs. They're very good at scaling it up at the start, but maybe later on you need a different type of leader, or you need to change your approach to leadership. What are your thoughts where you are with your business right now and the future of your business?
Yeah, I think whilst it's still relatively early stage, and let's say under 50 people, I think you can still have a lot of control from that point of view as a founder as I am. However, I don't think that necessarily means that leadership style or culture needs to change. I think I deeply admire founder-led businesses and founder-based companies, that some of which are quite famous. I'm sure there's lots of examples of them, because actually you then develop cultures in which then the new people that join can kind of almost buy into that and carry that with them. I typically, I've seen so many stories where original founders of companies have left or taken a back seat, and a corporate CEO or corporate management team come in and they go south, right? And that's such a shame. And I think not all of it, but a lot of it is to do with the founding principles and culture and DNA that came with that early days is lost.
Yeah.
And you go off your mission, you go off what made that company great. So it's very important to keep that in place. And not to say that founders should be in that particular role all the time, but it should keep that essence should always be there, particularly if a company is successful. Why get rid of that? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah. Well, a related point, some entrepreneurships, they want to look for exit, which means they put the business onto the stock market, they get money, then they exit. Are you seeing this business as a long-term like baby for you, or do you want to exit at some point?
It's both. Both, yeah. But that's, I guess, as well. That's a natural scenario when you take venture capital money as well. Yeah, it's whilst it's there to fund startups, the incentives are not necessarily aligned. So again, to people in the room who may be interested in VC like I was, don't necessarily have to take money, and I'd probably advise against it, because not all VCs are looking for very, very, $1 billion ideas, and not all ideas are like that. And they're trying to invest in very risky businesses that will, again, mostly fail, but the ones that do will do very well, and that's a very, very small percentage. But anyhow, coming back to the point, yes, naturally there'll be some sort of exit scenario, most likely an acquisition in our case, given that we are dealing in industrial context. We're dealing with concrete materials, construction materials, fertilizers, carbon capture. That's our industries that we're impacting, where there's long history of M&A. So yes, but in order to get there, you need to deliver, right? You need to scale up, you need to execute really well, and that's not easy. You have to do that very, very well as well. So it touches on the things I've talked about. It's a good team, a good structure, a good plan in place, and making sure you're revising that and thinking about how you can improve it, and doing that every day. Because it's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be easy. And if it was easy, everybody would do it, but they don't. So yeah.
That's a really good point. Venture capitalists, they often have different risk preferences than entrepreneurs like you, because they are diversified across lots and lots of businesses. So they care less if it goes bankrupt, because they have other businesses that can take off, whereas you are committed, your human capital, to that one business. So wonderful. That's been really fascinating. Let's take some questions from the audience now. You can just raise your hand and you'll get a chat box with a microphone inside. Yes.
Hi. So my question is, like, what are the challenges around making a sustainable business profitable? I think like Tron GMB, we know a lot of sustainability, and it keeps summing up. And our question that everyone has is,
I'd argue sustainability doesn't matter if what you're doing is not better. Green premium doesn't matter anymore. It has to be better, 3 times better, whatever you're doing. I think there's been a lot, and I work in a climate tech industry, or a climate tech startup, if you will. So I'm doing it firsthand. No one cares. I'll tell you straight, no one cares. So you have to be better than everybody else. You have to deliver a better product than everybody else, and you have to prove that. And then you can be sustainable. So, it's one of the value propositions. Just being greener for the sake of being greener doesn't mean anything. You have to be better. You have to be cheaper. You have to be stronger. You have to be faster, etc., etc. So focus on that. And then the sustainability is a nice, let's say, icing to the cake, if you will. No, please. Yes, it should be inherent. Yes. Now, sustainability may be inherent in that as well, but if it's sustainable and it's 5 times better, then naturally you'll be more profitable, because then hopefully it should come to bear that you're profitable because you're better. So don't get lost in the sustainability side, because it just doesn't work. And I can tell that for free.
Next one.
So, our question about strategy, there you mentioned that you had a very clear strategy, and I'm wondering, was this a strategic document that you forwarded, or was it more like a direction that you had in your mind that you want? Or
Yeah, it wasn't like a 50-page document and thesis. It was a more of a clear direction. Of course, it'd be written down to, let's say, a few details, 2 to 3 pages. But generally speaking, as let's say a founding team, you'd come to a consensus that, look, this is the direction we're going in because of this reason. We want to solve this problem, and this is how we're going to initially go about it. But still keeping your eyes open to the potential pitfalls that can come, right? Because let's say, it's kind of like driving a car at night. Like, you want to go in that direction, but you can't see that far. Your headlights only go that far. So therefore, you're only traveling from here to here, and then seeing how good it is or bad it is, and then continuing, right? But I know I want to go in that direction. And sometimes that journey can then be very bumpy, so you take a different route, and you have to go around a different route. So that's, to use that analogy, hopefully that helps answer your question. So, in practical context, in real business context, it's not usually writing a very formalized strategy document. Maybe in these big corporates, they do that because they've got nothing better to do. But generally in startups, it's about really acting upon core hypotheses really quickly and falsifying them, and to say whether this works or not, because your time is your most scarce resource. Regardless of any money you raise, time is more important, and the people's time that you take to do that, and quickly falsify whether what you're doing is worth doing or not.
Yes, and to clarify, a good strategy, you can put it on 1 page, not on 50.
Exactly. If it requires 50 pages, it's probably rubbish. So it should be like half a page, and it should be clear. It should be concise. Like, this is what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to do it, and this is how, and so on, right? And that takes time and effort. I'm not saying, even we struggle with that. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but that takes time, understanding, rhythm, So don't beat yourself up if you can't do that or you feel you struggle. It doesn't matter. That comes through experience and doing things.
Yeah, exactly. And the core questions, as you said, so why are you going to win in the market? How are you going to do it? What are the assumptions, or what you call hypotheses?
Yeah.
So you need to make certain assumptions about the future where you're going to win.
Yeah.
And you need to test those assumptions.
100%. And assumptions are the killer. Assumptions are always a killer in any context.
Can you give an example?
Oh, again, the sustainability one's a great one, right? So, thinking people will pay just because it's more sustainable, which was probably true a few years ago, but it's not anymore. So that's a great one. And even just in more operational context, because what we're doing is more of a technical domain, or quite a technical challenge. Even when they're trying to build a solution, there are inherent assumptions in that, and quickly they become wrong, right? So if you can minimize your assumptions in any context, fantastic. They're always going to be, but if you can then delete them or solve them and make sure they're clear and it's as factual as possible, you give yourself the best chance possible.
Perfect.
No problem.
Next one. Oh, we have a few. Let's, you first, or?
My question was, in that show, is that beauty of this, whichever you had that point. And you also mentioned that I'm beginning entrepreneurial street. So it's very hard, even just in the start. So my question was, what other traits do you over your business?
In hiring an employee, or just, they have, particularly where we are now, they need to be domain experts. I want them to be best in class at what they do. I want them to have drive. I want to see that they will go the extra mile, because when you're a company with limited resource, limited with constraints, right? We don't have massive amount of money, massive amount of time. Effort and application goes a long way. So like, I work 60 hours a week, and don't necessarily expect it from all my employees, but I expect them to put extra hours in, because we give ourselves, again, the best chance possible to win. And that's still not guaranteed, right? But we still have to do that, particularly in the early stage, in order to get to where we want to go. I think people who've got integrity, who will then come to you with problems, but have then just solutions, because again, the average person will just come to you with a problem and complain. But actually what they should do is come to you with a problem, say it was a problem, and I've got a solution for it, and I've already fixed it. that kind of mindset is lacking, really. And I think if you can have that ownership mentality and say, like, this is mine, I'm going to do the best job possible, and I'm going to become best in class in whatever function I want to do and prove it to the people that I'm working for, you'll do great. You'll do great. But that's hard. Again, that's not easy. So again, that requires a certain characteristic, a certain personality trait to work in those early stage environments in order to do that. Yeah, I'd say broadly speaking, those are traits. There are probably a few I'm missing, but just off the top of my head, that's what I would say.
Okay, next question. We got one last question. Either that answer.
Hello.
So,
Hi.
really interesting story. My question is about, so who are your co-founders in the team? What was the support structure around you? So you had
Yeah, good question. I think we had some advisors from the university here who were helping on more of a technical side. Then eventually when we made our first kind of industrial partnerships with potential customers, I think there was more of a collaborative effort there. So opposed to being very transactional and saying, yes, we're going to take X amount of money in order to deliver this solution for you, is more of a case of, because we were in an R&D phase, it's like, do you want to join the journey early to become an early adopter? And then we can then gain credibility by having our name next to their name, right? And you legitimize your presence in the market that way. So having those kind of more industrially focused advisors and people from industry who could come in and say, okay, yes, this is good, this is not so good, and having different profiles around was really important. So we had a couple from industry, a couple from academia, and a couple of just, I guess, even just day-to-day, personal advisors, right? Because when you're so invested in something, you need good personal support as well. So it's not just one category. You need to look at exactly what your business needs at that time and think about, okay, at this stage, we probably need someone who has insight in this. There's maybe got technical domain expertise in this thing that is related to our problem because we don't have it. And then from there, once again, if that proves to be true and that person can help you fix it, then you can go on to the next stage, because invariably there'll be something else that will require some advice. So yeah, it's a good question. I think advisors, again, not all of them are great, from my experience. So you'd rather just limit how many you work with and make sure that they're in it for the long term and not trying to be too transactional about it.
Okay, that was really insightful. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.